Hand over to the clerk now then, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Under agenda item number 1, I'll get my paperwork in front of me. There are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under agenda item number 2, there is no exempt information contained within the agenda. However, members, I would draw your attention to, you may deem it necessary to move into a private session when discussing certain details of the event management plan for the Leeds Festival, which is item number 7 on the agenda. And if so, at that point, if members could make, will be asked to agree to go into private session. Thank you. Under agenda item number 3, there are no late items of business. And under agenda item 4, please could I ask members to declare any interest if they have any? I can't see any indicated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Helen. Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Licensing Committee meeting. I'm Councillor James Gibson and the Chair of the Licensing Committee. Can I remind everyone that today's meeting is being live streamed on the City Council website so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. And before we move on to the agenda items, for the benefit of attendees, could I highlight that we will not begin agenda item 8, taxi and private hire licensing, result of the consultation on suitability minor motoring convictions, until at least 11:30. So that's at least 11:30. We'll start agenda item 8. And now can I please invite invite members and officers to introduce themselves, and please do mute your microphone after you've introduced yourself. So if we'll go around this way, Rob.
Good morning. My name is Robert Brown. I'm a solicitor in Leeds City Council's legal services. I'm the legal advisor to the first item on the agenda. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Isaac Wilson. I'm a councillor for Wheatwood Ward.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Martin and I'm councillor for Roundhay Wood.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Sharon Hamilton, representing Meanwood and Moortown Ward.
Good morning. I'm Councillor Luke Farley, one of the 3 Labour representatives for Bermondsey and Richmond Hill.
Good morning. My name's John Illingworth. I'm a councillor for Kirkstall Ward.
Good morning, everybody. Matthew Nelson on behalf of Entertainment Licensing.
Morning, everybody. Paul Money, Chief Officer in the Safer Stronger Communities team, and one of the responsibilities I have is for community safety in the city.
Morning, Nick Gardner, Leeds City Council Traffic Team.
Morning, Nicola Raper from Entertainment Licensing.
Chair, sorry, I thought you were just asking the officers and members, which is why I didn't jump in. Melvin Benn, Managing Director of Festival Republic.
Morning, Lucy Kinsella, Event Manager for Leeds Festival Republic.
Morning, Jeannie Leach, Licensing Coordinator for Leeds Festival Republic.
Morning, Paul Spandler, Environmental Health Manager for Leeds City Council.
Morning, Sophie Hardesty, Environmental Health Officer within Environmental Health.
Good morning, everybody. John Mulcahy, Chief Officer, Elections and Regulatory. Both licensing teams fall under my remit.
Morning, everybody. James Rogers, Director of Communities, Housing and Environment.
Morning, Councillor Hutchison, Moray North.
Morning, Councillor Rick Downs, Otley and Eden Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Anne Forsyth, Farnham and Wortley Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Neil Buckley, Old Woodley Ward.
Good morning, Linda Richards, Wetherby Ward. Good morning, I'm Helen Gray, I'm the clerk.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Helen, can we go through apologies on item number 5, please?
Thank you. Today we've received apologies from Councillor Flynn, Councillor Garthwaite and Councillor Smart.
Thank you very much. So now we move on to agenda item number 6, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 27th of May 22. Do members accept these minutes are a true and correct record? I'll assume that they're correct unless somebody indicates otherwise. No. Okay, thank you very much. So now we'll move on to agenda item number 7, Leeds Festival 2022. And could I invite officers from Entertainment Licensing to introduce the item, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chair. So this is in relation to the consideration of the report, which advises the Licensing Committee of the progress of multi-agency meetings in the Event Management Plan for Leeds Festival 2022. The festival has the benefit of a premises licence granted under Licensing Act 2003, authorising licensable activities throughout the event. The committee will note that a condition on the licence, which can be viewed on page 20 of the report, requires a licensing authority to approve the event management plan prior to the festival taking place. The event management plan is an evolving document, which will be finalised shortly before the start of the event. Hence the recommendation that the committee delegate approval of the event management plan to the chief officer, who will reserve approval until such time that all relevant agencies confirm through the Safety Advisory Group process that they are satisfied with the final content. Further information on the Safety Advisory Group process and membership is available at points 10 and 11 of the report. On behalf of the premises licence holder, Festival Republic Limited, we have Melvin Benn, Lucy Kinsella and Jeannie Leach available to present the Licensing Committee with the key updates on this year's event and to answer any questions that members may have regarding the event. Additionally, we have Nick Garden on behalf of the Highways Department, Paul Spandler on behalf of the Environmental Protection Team. They're on hand to answer any questions that the committee may have, and that's together with Paul Money, Chief Officer of Safer Leeds. Thank you, Chair.
Would members like to ask any questions now, or would you like to wait until the presentation from Festival Republic? Yep, Councillor Martin.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask a quick question now, before we approve the event management plan. Can the organisers or the officers ensure that Hackney carriage drivers have priority directly outside the main gates of Bramham Park, since they're the drivers who are able to pick up passengers without the need for a pre-booking? There's a fear, I think, that a deal's been done with Uber to give their drivers at this prime location, to give them priority at this prime location. And this is not in the interests of our residents. Thank you.
Okay, can I ask Mr. Benn and officers to note that question? I'll allow you to do your presentation and then you can come to that question afterwards. I think it'd be pertinent to do it that way. Are there any other questions before we go to the presentation? No? Okay, Mr. Benn, if you'd like to carry out, do your presentation, please.
Chair, thank you. I'll almost certainly get Lucy and Jeannie to do the presentation because they're much more skilled on the technology than I am, and we're focusing, principally, I think, on traffic noise and safeguarding, but we will pick up on the Hackney carriage issue as part of the traffic. I think we're going to share a presentation. Thank you.
So we've prepared a presentation just to talk through the traffic management plan, being one of the sort of pertinent things that I know everyone was keen to understand. And with the visual maps, it's just sometimes then a bit easier to go through the routes that we're proposing this year that we've signed off on, and to run through how we plan to get not only customers and festival goers to the festival, but also the diversion routes that we've put in place for local residents. So firstly, yes, just to run through the traffic management plans, we've got 3 main routes into the festival. We've got Brown route, which is for all of our northbound traffic. That goes on the A1M. We take people up past the festival, they come off at junction 45 and then they come in on a left turn into the site. And then we have our white gates, that's the white route for all of our southbound traffic. Again, using the A1M, they come in off of junction 44 and a left turn into the site. New for this year, the red route will remain the same throughout the festival. So from the Wednesday when we open for early bird ticket holders right through until we egress on the Monday. And that route is using the A64 off of junction 44 Bramham interchange. Since the announcement of ELAW being open and ready in advance of the festival, it's allowed us to use that as a diversion route for local residents and put that one-way system in throughout. So it should be a lot easier for everyone. We've got one comms plan throughout this year. Our traffic is a lot more contained into one area rather than taking people up around the A58 and Collingham and Bardsey, which we've done in previous years on those days when we didn't have the A64 one-way closure in place. So they are the 3 routes for this year. And like I say, they remain the same from the Wednesday right through until the Monday. So as I mentioned briefly, the with ELAW being open, that's brilliant in that we can now send local residents and traffic, especially the East Coast traffic, using that ELAW route. We've sent out in our 21-day letters on Friday these routes to all of the local residents, guiding them to use the alternative route over the festival periods, and especially on those busy times, which are the Wednesday, Thursday, and then peak ingress and egress Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Sorry. In addition, we've also kept the Aberford Village closure, which was introduced last year, just to avoid it being a rat run for especially sat-navs who were sending people through Aberford as soon as there was a little bit of congestion on the A1M. We've kept that in place. We've been liaising with residents and the Parish Council of Aberford to ensure that it works for everyone and especially the local businesses. New for this year, however, we have also introduced a dedicated village liaison manager, as we have with Thorner for the closures that we put in place there. So we've already got that village liaison manager on board and into the community on hand to answer any questions that they may have, or to allow access for customers, or if someone's having a big garden party, you know, we're able to facilitate that. The new addition as well to help with our egress plan this year is essentially the stretch of Westwood roads between Thorner Road and Wattle Syke. That will become a dual carriageway for peak egress, which will essentially be Friday, Saturday, Sunday night and into Monday morning. This does mean that the residents of Bramham will have to take a 5 to 6 mile diversion route and not straight into Bramham on those evenings, but we're working with them to make sure that's communicated. And there's also a local shuttle bus which has been put in place, and again we'll just be working through the diversion routes for that with them. Essentially that dual carriageway for Westwood roads will make everything a lot more quicker on the out. We're hoping to ease the congestion that we had, especially around that area. So it does just mean that we can get people to leave the site a lot quicker this year in 2 lanes rather than 1. As in previous years, we've got the Barrack closures along Kiddle Lane and Potterton Lane. So that ties in with the A64 closure that we have in place. And again, that's been in place for a number of years now. And we've got the residents who we speak to, and we allow special passes for them to use to get in and out of closures. Thorner we've spoken about. They have agreed this year to allow us to send our shuttle buses at the end of the night through the village, again just to give them a quicker route back into the city centre, giving us a quicker turnaround time to get them there and back, meaning again that we should be able to get people off site a bit quicker this year. And that's the Thorner closure map. You can see on there we've got an additional closure this year, just a provisional one to stop people from coming in. Again, sat-navs, whilst we have the ability to put the closures on, sometimes, or as we all know, even to save a minute, it will just send you a quicker way down, especially Home Farm Lane or some of the smaller routes into Bramham Park. So we've just put a provisional closure on there, which has all been agreed and put in as a TTRO with highways. And again, just the Skelton's Lane closure 5, has we've had to put an amendment in there because of ELAW and the way that that new network and road system is in place. So that's in summary some of the changes that we've made. There's been lots of consultation with Nick Gardner from Leeds City Council, as well as local residents, to make sure that everything's covered and all of the diversion routes, like I say, are in place, not just for the festival goers, but for everyone else using those routes over the festival periods. And that's it. Any questions on traffic?
Yeah, we'll ask questions on traffic now. Do members have questions on traffic? No. Okay. Is there? Have you sent this to local? Well, you've not sent it to local ward members because I represent Crossgates and Winmore ward. Can you send us this information, please? It may be that we might have something to contribute.
I think we'll send it to Nicola, and Nicola can forward it on to all the relevant ones, Chair, if that's.
Yes, please. I think that'll be useful. Any other questions? No.
I should just mention as well, just because Councillor Martin mentioned about the taxis. So now this year, because we do have that A64 closure in place throughout, the taxi gate has always been in off of the A64. We then, like I say, because of the closure, it means that we can keep it contained within that area, and then anyone wanting to get straight back out to Leeds will use the gate pretty much next to it. We have to bring taxis slightly off the road into the site to avoid people then walking onto the A64. That's the only reason it's not adjacent to the A64. It's in the field further back, just to keep pedestrians off the road and avoid any sort of, it sits next to our pick up and drop off area. So the last thing we want is for parents to kind of ring their kids or whoever they're picking up to say, oh, just pop out onto the road, rather than we have to pull into the gate and turn around. So it's set back slightly, but the route that we've put in a lot of work for taxis to ensure that they're not having to drive through the site. It is very much contained within. They go inside one gate, pick up, and there's separated out into a taxi rank for hackney carriages. There is a pen for Uber, which aren't given priority. It's simply a separate area for them for anyone who's booked an Uber. And then there is a private hire area as well. So they're all three areas next to each other, and they use the same gate in and out.
I'll come back on that, Councillor Martin.
So you are assuring us that Uber haven't got the priority area in terms of proximity to getting off the site?
Correct.
The hackney carriage drivers, because they're the ones that can pick up without booking, will be, if anything, the closest to the entrance and exit, or mainly the exit.
They won't be the closest. They're not the closest. They're in equal positions. They have their own pickup point. We have a private hire pickup, and we have an Uber pickup, and we have a non-booked hackney carriage pickup. They're in the same place.
Right. Okay. Thank you. If it is as Mr. Ben says, then yes, as long as Uber haven't got priority. I was led to believe that Uber had got priority.
Would there be a problem if Uber? Uber don't have priority, but would there be a problem if they did?
Well, yes, simply because it's the hackney carriage drivers who can pick up without booking, and there's a fear that the Uber drivers might be picking up people who haven't got a booking, and that's obviously not within the regulations.
No, I understand from a regulation point of view, but from our point of view, there isn't an issue provided they have a booking.
Okay.
I think similar comments have come to all of us. It was about convenience as well, given that hackney carriage, obviously you don't need to have a prior booking, so it would make sense for them to be directly in front of where people are likely to come out of the festival. Given that there's pre-booking for private hire, they'll be able, anybody who's got a pre-booking will be able to sort of walk and find where the vehicle is a little bit further down, rather than having to walk to get to the hackney carriages. That's what's I think we've all received emails to that effect. Do you want to comment on that and why it isn't that way? Because that does seem logical to me.
Our customers are the priority, and therefore we want to give them ease of access for what they have booked or what they haven't booked. The hackney carriage is less the priority, more the customer. Our punters are the priority.
I think the argument would be that it would be more convenient for customers to be able to have access to hackney carriage straight away, straight out of the festival. And then if they did have a pre-booking, they would be able to use the app to find it. So I think the argument is that
they're all together. They're all together, Chair.
Yeah,
they're all together.
So there's no priority.
No.
Okay. Right. Okay. We shall move on. Is there any other presentations from Festival Republic, please?
There's no further visual presentation. We just thought it may be best to present the traffic in that way. I know that members were keen to hear more about noise, safeguarding and sustainability, but perhaps it may be more pertinent to come to questions unless Marvin had a particular point we wanted to share.
No, I guess the only, just in terms of sustainability, I'd pick up on the fact that we've now, and some of you may have seen it, actually may not have seen it because it's really only online. We have done we've formed a partnership with an organisation called Music Declares Emergency. It's a charity that was created by musicians themselves, and we in terms of the sustainability, again, I can get the the stuff sent around in terms of who they are and about who they are. They have a slogan which is no music on a dead planet. We work very closely with them. We have now actually incorporated it into our Leeds Festival logo. I don't know if we have a copy of that anywhere that people can see. I think Jeannie's probably going to get that. You can see it's taken a very significant prominence for us. We are going to create a No Music on a Dead Planet Music Declares Emergency eco campsite where people commit to minimal environmental standards within that campsite. I leave no trace essentially is the core of that. That isn't launched as yet, so I think that's the press behind me. It's certainly not a state secret, so it doesn't matter if it goes out, but technically we haven't launched it as yet. Yeah, that's probably the key thing for us in terms of trying to persuade people to take their rubbish away and to pick up their tents and take them back home.
Okay. Right. Do we have any more questions from after that presentation? Or any questions for officers? No? Okay. So we'll move into closed session, I guess.
Thank you, Chair. The Chair has given an indication that the committee might wish to move into closed session now to discuss matters in private. Are members happy to do so? Yeah, thank you. If I could ask members of the public who are in attendance to leave the room for the moment, I will come and ensure that you're called back into the meeting room once members have discussed what they need to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. Webcast is now back on, and for those watching on webcast, we've got a question from Councillor Forsyth. Councillor Forsyth.
Right, thank you very much. Obviously, in planning the festival, you have plans for extreme weather, which presumably the festival is very often heavy rain and mud. But this year in particular, we have been having to deal with extreme heat events. And I just wanted to ask, in terms of health and safety, what planning there is. I mean, if it was that time a couple of weeks ago when we were having upper 30 temperatures, I just wanted specifically to know what plans are in place for that.
I've just come out of a festival this weekend in Wilderness Festival in the Cotswolds, where the temperatures were 30-ish, I think. Nothing in my veins or my blood makes me believe that we're going to have sunny weather at Leeds, but we may. In terms of, I mean, I guess our planning for sort of extreme weather is usually based on thunder, lightning, winds, etc. It's very rarely has been based on extreme heat. The key areas for extreme heat are water and shade. We are fortunate in that we have a very tree populated campsites and festivals, so we do get some shade from that. We have a large number of marquees where entertainment takes place, so people can take shade in that. We are very strong on our water provision, both in the campsite and in the arena. We will allow people to bring in suntan cream, obviously, to the festival site. We have to be careful with some things that come in, because people often use those containers to bring things in that they shouldn't necessarily be in, but we obviously have to be as lenient as possible in the event of extreme weather. We employ full-time, not full-time, but we have a contract with a super weatherlight satellite that gives us up-to-date information on exactly what we're anticipating, particularly in the event of the weather turning and it being thunder and lightning, in the event of needing to evacuate a particular area of the site because of the lightning, for example. In terms of the heat, there isn't a huge amount that we can do other than ensure that we have adequate water provision and some shade, and we will do that to the best of our ability.
If it was the sort of extreme heat that we've experienced already, I mean, we've had to, some people have had to stop work, at 12 o'clock, working outside over the midday period. Have you thought about planning for any rescheduling of events? And also the other issue about this is the alcohol too, which is in terms of so I'm just asking whether this has been thought through and considered.
Well, in a festival I had for a long time is a festival in Spain called Benicassim Festival, where temperatures of that nature were not unusual. Benicassim Council allowed us to start the festival at 6 p.m. and finish at 6 a.m. And I'm certainly open to hearing that from Leeds City Council. I think my festival goers would be delighted at the thought that they could be start at 6 and finish at 6. But unless and until that happens, the rescheduling is not possible. We certainly can't reschedule to a different weekend. The artists are not available, the infrastructure is not available, etc., etc. I shall present it to the first SAG
that we will be starting at 6 o'clock and finishing at 6 o'clock in the morning, and hopefully they will all agree, but I suspect they won't. I think we will suffer the heat, unfortunately. Yeah.
Questions from members? Yes, Councillor Farley.
Thank you. Was thinking maybe a fact-finding trip to Benicassim is in order. Yeah, just a quick question in terms of welfare for people who are going to be working at the festival. What facilities on site are going to be provided for those? You know, obviously it's quite an intense period of work for anybody working on a bar or obviously running security. So just be interested to learn a little bit more about the welfare facilities for those members of staff.
I'll get Lucy to pick up on this. I mean, obviously, we've got staff very much working on site now. You know, we've got areas of shade, we've got water facilities, we've got food and drink facilities, etc., etc. During the course of the festival itself, again, there are you know, break times, etc., where people can withdraw. They're not working 24 hours a day. There isn't welfare facility per se, but each of the in the sense of it, there's welfare for everyone, obviously, in terms of the festival goers and or others, but there isn't a backstage welfare provision separate from or a working welfare provision separate from the main public welfare position. We've never had a need for that as yet, but there is a each you know, for example, each security company has their own base, has their own facilities of setup and toilets and you know, showers, etc., feeding facilities, that type of stuff. So and obviously a festival like any festival like Leeds Festival is made up of a lot of contractors. They generally have their own setup where they provide their own welfare facilities for their own teams.
No.
Yeah, so I suppose it's more just about respite and making sure that the people who are working at the festival can take, you know, obviously they'll be taking breaks, but make sure that that break is, you know, I mean, relaxing is perhaps not the correct word, but at least an opportunity to take a step back from the busy environment.
Very much in plan, Councillor, very much in plan.
Any other questions? No, in that case, we'll turn to the recommendations then, please. So the committee is asked to delegate the approval of the final event management plan to the Chief Officer, Elections and Regulatory. So can members please indicate whether they are in favour of this recommendation, please? Okay, so that's unanimous and carried. Thank you very much. Now we have a scheduled item at 11:30, agenda item. Sorry. Okay, those against. I mean, it was unanimous, but okay, nobody against. Any, well, given that it was unanimous, is there any abstentions? I mean, it would be somebody's voting twice, but okay, fair enough. Okay, we have the next agenda item, which is agenda item number 8, was scheduled for 11:30. So until that time, we're going to take a scheduled break. Councillor Buckley, yes.
Just on a query about the procedure, why does it have to be 11:30?
Because we want to make sure that, yeah, because Sharon needs a copy, because we want to make sure that everybody from the public that wants to attend can attend. And that's why we decided to schedule it. Okay. Right, so we shall meet back here at 11:30.
refusal of inspection of documents. Under agenda item 2, there's no, under agenda item 2, there's no exempt information where the committee might move into a private session. Under agenda item 3, we've got no late items. Under agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any interests that they may have in the forthcoming item?
Yes, Councillor Forsyth.
Oh, thank you. I responded to this consultation last year prior to knowing that I was going to be on licensing committee from this May. And whilst I'm confident that I would remain of an open mind, on balance, I do feel it is appropriate that I should no longer take part in this item. So I'll be leaving the meeting now.
Thank you, Councillor Forsyth, for recusing yourself from this committee. Are you sitting? Yeah, okay. You need to leave the meeting. Okay, you need to leave the meeting. Okay, thank you very much. Right.
Thank you, Chair. So apologies, we've received apologies from Councillor Smart, Councillor Flynn and Councillor Garthwaite. And just one further thing I've been asked to draw to the members of the public's attention. I note that some of you are recording the committee meeting, which is absolutely fine. But if could I ask anybody who does not wish to be recorded to indicate now, and then I would ask members of the public who are recording the meeting themselves not to record people who've asked not to be recorded. Thank you.
Does anybody want to indicate that they're unhappy to be recorded? No, I'll take it that everybody's happy then. Can I also ask people to turn the phones on silent, because there's quite a lot of ping-ponging going about and it's not good for concentration. Of course, you're allowed your phones on to record though. Right, thank you very much. So we'll move on to item number 6 then, please, which is the meetings of the previous meeting held on the 27th of May 2022. We have already been through this again, but just we will go through it. Are members happy with the minutes? Yes, thank you very much. Well, that's accepted. In which case, we now move on to agenda item number 8, which is taxi and private hire licensing, results of consultation on suitability minor motoring convictions. Okay, right, Councillor Martin, I can see that you're keen to ask a question and represent your constituents, but what I'll do is I'll allow Andrew to go through the report first, and then you can ask the next question. Okay, that's okay. Yeah, good point. Thank you very much. We will go around. Sorry, I missed out because we're in the second part of the meeting, but it would be good practice for us to go around and introduce ourselves again for everybody that's new to the meeting. Can we please do that? Sorry for that. Yes.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Walker. I'm the Head of Legal Services and I'm the legal advisor to today's panel.
Good morning. My name's Isaac Wilson. I'm a councillor in Wheatwood Ward.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Martin and I'm a councillor from Roundhay Ward.
Hi, everyone. I'm Councillor Sharon Hamilton, representing Moortown and Meanwood Ward.
Good morning. Luke Farley, Labour councillor for Bermondsey and Richmond Hill.
Good morning. So yes, my name is John Illingworth. I'm a councillor for Kirkstall Ward.
Morning, everybody. Andrew White, taxi and private hire licensing manager.
Good morning, everyone. John Mulcahy, Chief Officer, Elections and Regulatory.
Morning, James Rogers, Director of Communities, Housing and Environment.
Morning, everybody. Councillor Hutchison, Morley North Ward.
Morning, Councillor Rick Downs, Otley and Eden Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Neil Buckley, All Woodley Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Linda Richards, Wetherby Ward.
Good morning, I'm Helen Gray, I'm the clerk.
Excellent, thank you very much. So we will now move on to the report from Andrew White. We also have John Mulcahy and Nicole Walker there as well to answer questions if required moving forward. So we'll move now on to Andrew. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask everybody to turn to the first page and the summary on the page 21 and just over the page onto page 22. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through the summary, and then I've got a set of about 10 slides. And what I'll do is I'll draw your attention to the particular parts in the report that refer to each I'm just aware this report is quite long, particularly with the appendices, and I want to draw your attention to when I was writing the report, what I thought were the main features. Want to get those up front and to make those very clear. The slides themselves will end on the specific options and the implications of those options before we go to questions and answers. And I've framed it that way. But if there is a burning question that we really can't proceed with, if you make your question to the chair and then see if we can answer the question. But otherwise, if I try and get through the introduction and then the slides, and then we have the questions. So page 21. What is this report about? And I think particularly, for licensing committee members who haven't been members of licensing committee for very long, this goes back 3, 4, 5 years in terms of regional and national work that the council's been taking part in together with other authorities. One important area of this work, and particularly this is at the heart of the council as a regulator, the council as the licensing authority for taxi and private hire, is the approach to suitability, whether a person is seen as a fit and proper person to hold a license. And certainly over the last 10, 20, 30 years, the list of factors that authorities would take into account have got longer and longer about what would be taken into account as to whether someone's a fit and proper person to hold a license. The focus today is on the council having undertaken consultation on changing one of the criteria within the council's suitability and convictions policy. We've actually withheld that as an option, held a working group, held further consultation. One of the options is to progress with the recommendation as consulted. One is to make some revisions and one is to start again. So the report sets out the full results of the consultation in appendices A and B, but also reveals a very strong difference of opinion between the responses of the general public and the members of the taxi and private hire trade. And that has made the reports rather longer and more detailed than it might otherwise have been. So the licensing committee are asked to consider the outcome of the consultation and recommend to members of executive board, if it's options A or B, a proposed way forward using the options, or option C, to not adopt either of A or B, and that further work is required to determine a more appropriate approach. In relation to option B, and really in response to the findings of the consultation, minor amendments such as those seeking to respond to driver concerns and further mitigation that we think we can provide around warnings or training or other decisions for license holders, we can include those in the recommendations for executive board. But you may well have questions around that. And then just turning the page, and then I'll go on to the slides. The option following the consultation, which I think addresses the main findings of the consultation, are that we could not grant an application when someone has 7 or more points on their license. Existing license holders reaching 7 or more points on their license for minor motoring convictions would receive a warning and further training. And then existing license holders reaching 9 points or more for minor motoring convictions and who have previously attended training on the policy may have their license refused or revoked. But the focus again would be on the individual circumstances of that, but also the intention of the policy is to only refuse or revoke a license where there are very clear concerns for public safety. And again, I'll summarize that when it comes to the slides as well. I'll leave that slide on the screen. Right, here we go. So the report offers 3 options, each with a different implementation approach. The first 2 would lead to recommendations to go to executive board. And again, we've previously taken the whole of the suitability policy to executive board. And given the level of interest in this item as well, we are going to continue with taking options to executive board. So the focus on the report really is the context of suitability, the focus on minor motoring convictions, what we consulted upon, and then options for the way forward, particularly the practical proposals for how the policy could be applied if option A or B is approved. And option B includes some more information as I've just provided, but also includes some flow charts as well to try and summarize exactly how the policy would be applied as well. Okay, I'm going to try and summarize the timeline we've got. But going back to 2014, Leeds City Council implemented a convictions criteria policy, and we think we were one of the first authorities to implement such a policy. 3 or 4 years later, both West Yorkshire and York authorities agreed to align their convictions policies, meaning we would apply the same rules as to someone getting a license to work, primarily taxi and private hire drivers, but in some cases, suitability policies also affect other license holders like private operators and so on. The Institute of Licensing and others, including the Local Government Association and Lawyers for Local Government, developed what they called a model suitability policy in 2018. Then in 2018 and 19, West Yorkshire and York authorities, that's the 5 authorities in West Yorkshire and the City of York, consulted on a common suitability policy aligned to the IOL standard. And the more detail of that is in paragraph 5 of the report, where we've got some specific details about where West Yorkshire and York differ from the Institute of Licensing standard approach. Then in 2019 and 20, West Yorkshire and York authorities implemented their versions of the suitability policy. Leeds City Council had its policy approved at the December Executive Board, and it was to take effect from the 1st of February. The other authorities had implemented their policies rather sooner, so we were the last of those 6 authorities to implement. In 2020, as well as excluding the minor motoring convictions, the council agreed to retain the minor motoring convictions approach from the previous convictions policy, which meant that as long as a driver was not disqualified for minor motoring convictions, they will be able to apply for a license, and they would be able to retain a license, which would mark the council out as significantly some distance away from other authorities in West Yorkshire, but other authorities who were following the Institute of Licensing. Later in 2020 and in 2021, the Department for Transport implemented statutory guidance, and that requires licensing authorities to have regard to the statutory guidance, including suitability standards. And that particularly means that the council should have a clear and compelling reason not to follow the approach that's set out by the Institute of Licensing and the other standards for the Department of Transport. In 2021, Leeds City Council held 2 working group meetings on minor motoring convictions. And then following that, in the autumn of 2021, we conducted extensive consultation on minor motoring convictions. The results of the consultation threw up lots and lots of issues, which is why we've had a delay between the end of the consultation and why we've got a report today. So that's the chronology. I'm going to turn to the consultation, which then is the focus. This is quite a long part of the report. This is paragraph 16 to 36. The questions for the consultation are the first part of Appendix A. The analysis is the second part of Appendix A. The second appendix is the response to the main findings. So we grouped the findings of the consultation into the top 7 or 8 categories and then provided a detailed answer and response to each one. So in 2018-19, Leeds City Council consulted on suitability policy and driver training proposals at the same time. We had many more responses, some 3 or 4 times as many responses on driver training and suitability. And I would say we've learned a lesson that we wouldn't in future carry out 2 consultations at the same time. So it was very definitely, we had 700 or 800 responses on driver training, and we had 200 or 300 responses on suitability. It's something that I think we've learned a lesson from there. 2021, Leeds City Council holds the working group meetings on minor motoring convictions. The working group was formed of councillors, of members of the trade, but also of passenger groups as well. We had representatives from adult social care, representatives from Safer Roads, representatives from the police, to make sure that there is a round of discussion about this policy. So the working group generated the revised criterion. 2021, the City Council then conducted extensive consultation on minor motoring convictions, and we got over 2,200 responses from licence holders. A large majority objected to the proposal. Members of the public, a majority, in favour of the proposal, including some members of the public who objected to the proposal because it didn't go strongly enough in terms of assuring them of passenger safety. The many comments revealed licence holders feared automatic revocation of the licence, which was not proposed. Many comments revealed licence holders suggest Leeds' approach is draconian and out of step with other licensing authorities, again, which I'll turn to in the report, which is not the case. But we found that out following the consultation. So the council's taken the responses into account in developing the proposals for discussion at licensing committee, and particularly the response to specific comments in Appendix B as well. And then we provided some additional communication materials to make sure that we can share those with taxi and private hire trade and other stakeholders as well. I'm aware that this could be quite a dry issue, and actually what people want to know really is how the policies or the options would be applied as people stand. So we provided that in a much more sort of graphic form than we've been able to do before. So turning to the comparison, and this is something we've done really following the consultation. So the comparison is in paragraphs 31 to 35 of the reports. After receiving the consultation responses, Leeds City Council contacted all of the licensing authorities in England for whom the Department for Transport statutory guidance applies. They must have regard to that whole statutory safeguarding approach, including on suitability. 85 authorities responded, which is about a third of all the licensing authorities in England. All 5 of the other West Yorkshire and York authorities have applied the suitability policy, including minor motoring convictions. A majority of authorities, 72 out of 85, have a minor motoring convictions criterion identical or close to the Institute of Licensing standard. A minority of authorities, 13 out of 85, have a minor motoring conviction threshold in variance with the Institute of Licensing standard. Actually, when we ask authorities what they've done something similar to what Leeds has done, which is they've had some consultation and they've made some steps to change and to clarify exactly how the policy would be applied. Only 3 out of the 85 that responded had said we had a 12-point threshold before and it hasn't changed as a result of either the discussion or the consultation on suitability. The council would be an outlier if it were to retain the 12-point threshold, and would certainly be in line with the majority of authorities if it adopted the criterion option B. Actually, we'd be very close to the majority of authorities if it adopted option A as well. Okay, turning to the options. And the options are set out in paragraph 39. So the options for licensing committee, and I admit it's an unusual report. Normally the report comes with very clear recommendations. So the option A is the proposed criteria. That's the one that the working group developed and the council consulted upon, is approved without further amendment. B, the proposed criterion is amended having regard to the consultation responses. And just to go into more detail, and I'll leave this slide up as well, because I think a lot of the questions will be about the implementation. Applications for a new taxi or private hire driver license will not be accepted when an applicant has 7 or more points for minor motoring convictions. Existing license holders reaching 7 or more points for minor motoring convictions would receive a warning and would only be required to attend appropriate training. And then third, existing license holders reaching 9 points or more for minor motoring convictions and who have previously attended training under this policy may have their license refused or revoked, dependent on the individual circumstances of the driver concerned and offences committed. And particularly when taking that action, the intention of the policy would only be to refuse or revoke a license where there are very clear concerns for public safety. And I'll just put a note in there to say, to draw your attention to the flow charts in Appendix C as well. We've gone into some detail about the different options and permutations. And then thirdly, third option, the proposed criterion should not be approved or amended, and that further work is required to determine a more appropriate criterion. That might be a repeat of a working group, further options, further areas for discussion. So for option B, and in relation to the consultation responses, I'd like to advise you that minor amendments, such as seeking to respond to driver concerns or provide further mitigation such as warning or training, actions short of a refusal to renew or a revocation. We can recommend that to Executive Board for approval. We don't need to go out to consult again, even if that wasn't in black and white in the consultation. So I'm going to stop there. The next slide just says questions and answers, so I won't put that up on screen. I'll probably leave the options slide up on the screen.
Thank you very much for that, Andrew. It's very concise and we appreciate it. So we're going to turn now onto the question phase. Members are invited to ask questions, but before we start that item, I wanted to thank all the taxi and private hire drivers that live and work in Leeds on behalf of the licensing committee. Drivers do play an enormously important role in our city, and they're vital to our economy, and so often go above and beyond to support vulnerable people in our communities. So again, thank you for everybody that's here, that's drivers, operators, for everything that you do. Councillor Martin, you've indicated the other questions, so I'm going to let you ask the questions first.
Thank you. Yes, I've got two questions. One about the points and one about the process of revocation of a licence. So point 12 of your report or of the report highlights that fewer than 2% of taxi and private hire drivers in Leeds had 9 points or more on their licence. However, the majority of drivers do not want any changes to the number of points for licensing purposes because of the risk to their livelihoods. So I would like to know what evidence do we have that this proposed change will make a positive impact on the safety of our residents. So that's my points question. And I'd also like to ask a question about the process. So the report states that licenses will only be considered for revocation when a driver reaches 9 points. However, this introduces subjectivity for the individual officer. So that takes the decision-making process. I've been sort of considering how we can ensure that there's enough transparency in that decision-making process that gives our drivers confidence that it will be a fair process, and only and revocation will only be used as a final resort, and only when it's deemed that the licence holder is a risk to public safety. And I've taken some time to speak to lots of my constituents who are drivers, and in these discussions it's been suggested that a licensing subcommittee would be a sensible way to ensure that no one who receives 9 points has a licence revoked unless they're a genuine risk to public safety. So can we go ahead with this as a suggestion? Those are my two questions.
Thank you. I know there's work been done on licensing subcommittees from Councillor Cooper and previous chair, Councillor Ray, had asked for work to be done, and I'm taking this up as well. So there should be an answer for that. Who's best to come back with the subcommittee question, please? Or sorry, we'll go with Lisa's first question. Is that, yeah?
Okay. Yeah, in terms of evidence on points, so I think that it's about the second or third highest area of complaints that the council get. The public are concerned about the manner of driving. So we regularly get 10 or more % of our complaints that we get from the public about taxi and private hire drivers or vehicles is to do with the standard of driving or the way the vehicle is driven. I would agree that it's 10% of all complaints is probably fewer than 100 complaints a year. In comparison to 30 million journeys, it's a very small percentage. I think in terms of the risk around that, if you have a small number of drivers who repeatedly break speed limits or go through traffic lights at red, and I think they're generally the sorts of things that would fall under minor motor convictions. I'm afraid that we have to take an approach where it comes to driving standard that we would say we need to be reassured that everybody reaches that level. And I think particularly in terms of the Department of Transport thought the threshold of 7 points which was recommended. That was 7 points accrued over a 5-year period, and Leeds and the other West Yorkshire Authority thought it should be 7 points over the last 3 years. We thought if you took into account the likelihood that someone will be offered 1, a speed awareness course, 2, 3 points for the first incident, third, 3 points for the third incident, someone who's accrued 7 points or more has probably had 3 separate incidents within recent memory of poor driving standard. So that's the suggestion from the Institute of Licensing and others, and then endorsed by the Department for Transport. In terms of the position in Leeds, I would agree with you that we're talking about the drivers with the very highest level of points. And again, it's fair to say 80% of drivers don't have any points on their license. But I'm afraid that the focus of regulation has to as well be on the small minority that would pose a higher risk. And again, the numbers I'm going to tell you are probably not very large in terms of that, but we have maybe 200, 300 accidents reported to us, the licensing authority for taxi and private hire. So we've got 80 to 100 complaints a year about driving standard, 200 to 250 accidents a year, where there is a likelihood of the vehicle not being on the road. That doesn't mean that driver's the cause of it, but if someone is speeding as well, they're more likely to be involved in a more severe accident as well. So for us there, in terms of the evidence there, the suggestion is that we would say drivers, taxi and private hire drivers drive a higher number of miles than the average motorist. Their passengers have fewer options or alternatives. Their drivers have a lot of control over what their passengers do, and therefore those passengers are entitled to feel safe, and therefore the council has an obligation to make sure that it applies an appropriate, proportionate approach to points. What I think we've been doing over the past 2 years is refining that option around where we think the points level should be in terms of that, and that's very much a focus on the public perception as well as on the views of licence holders, the majority of whom haven't got any points, possibly will never get any points in terms of that. So that's the position on points. In terms of revocation and subjectivity, I mean, I think particularly, I don't think the two necessarily come together, but the sorts of factors that an officer would take into account when it comes to the circumstances of the individual case would sort of thing that would very definitely come into account might be the how recently someone would have been on the remedial training. So I've seen the presentation and the content of the driver training. The driver training that we're proposing to put people who've got more than 7 points on, it's about 6 hours. It's a significant driver training. If you've been on a speed awareness course, it's at least as long again as a speed awareness course in terms of that. It's significant areas of training, drawing attention to the particular areas that taxi and private hire drivers find themselves coming into conflict with. So one would be the how quickly after going on remedial training, someone then accrued a further conviction. But other areas there, and again, I'm not sure they're necessarily subjective, might be around the depend on how long the points stay on someone's license. If the points are about to come off someone's license, this isn't about us saying we'll see if we can revoke somebody. If we think someone if they're going to have the points come off their license in September and we're aware of a current issue in August, our approach very much there will be to take that into account when making the decision and saying, well, actually, this individual, they're going to be dropping back below a certain level. Let's just see, when do we do the driver training? Or for example, are there circumstances for the particular endorsements? Are they the same issues? Is this a pattern of behaviour that somehow we think we're able to make change short of a revocation? And then I'm just trying to check in terms of the third area, in terms of just discussions around revocations and whether there could be another step put in there, which isn't in the report in terms of that, but is open to the council. It's within the scope of the council's constitution for a subcommittee, but very, very open to have that discussion. In fact, that's one of the areas that's also in the statutory guidance that the council should consider ways to involve councillors.
think Councillor Martin was asking about consistency of approach and transparency, and that's why subcommittees were suggested. John, you're indicating that you'd like to continue with that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of additional comments there about the referral for training. If members were to adopt recommendation B, which is the amended wording, what that would actually mean in practice is that nobody who's licensed by the council would actually be revoked in the first instance if they were at 9 points or more, because those people would not have had the opportunity of having the training that they would have had if they'd have been at 7 or 8 before. So everybody above 7 points, including those above 9 points, would be considered for further training in the first instance. And then only if further points were accrued, that would mean that they would then be considered for revocation dependent on the seriousness of the matter. So that's just to clarify that. Secondly, regarding the suggestion of a licensing subcommittee, yes, you're absolutely right, Chair. This had been considered by Councillor Cooper before, and we have done some work on this. There is a route that we can set up so that members would be, so that if anybody was considered for revocation, it could come to a licensing subcommittee. There is a method for us to do that. We've had a discussion with our legal team about that. We can put that in place. So that would be something that we could support quite easily if that was an additional recommendation that members would like to make today.
John, can I ask Nicole to come in and clarify some of the legal points, please?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, just what my colleague John has just explained there. At the moment, officers have delegated authority from this committee to make decisions about revocations of licences. But if members wanted to, say, for a pilot period, have a little bit more involvement in that decision making in relation to revocation for matters that related to minor motoring offences, then that is a procedure we can put in place, like John's described. It is something you could decide today that you wanted the committee to do for a pilot period, and that could form part of your resolution today.
That's great, thank you. I've got Lisa for your second question. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And I'd suggest that we do move to that option. And I may have misunderstood the officer, but yes to the training. I wasn't arguing against the training. Yes to that, and then the subcommittee. So, but just to go back to my first question, which is about the points, and I may have missed you making answering this specific point. But what I was after was, do we have any evidence of a specific correlation between resident safety in Leeds and the implementation of a policy that pushes the points up? Sorry, pushes the points down. Apologies. From 12 to 9.
We have the results of the consultation where, when the members of the public were asked their views, and we got 800 members of the public, which is more than we've ever had before. Their views were something like 70% in favour of the proposal for option A, but there was a small number, maybe 10%, maybe 50 out of the 800 who thought it should be even more demanding than a refusal at 7 points and a revocation with, after training. So there's evidence in the consultation as well. I think without going back and asking in more detail around that, I don't think we have that information, Councillor.
So okay, I'm going to move to Councillor Buckley. You can come back after. Councillor Buckley, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the questions that Councillor Martin asked were completely sensible, and I think they're the basis on. I've got several things, if I may, to talk about, and I just wondered whether is all of this a solution in search of a problem. My first question really is, for how many years has the 12 points rule applied? So that's question number one. And in terms of commenting on this whole process, the feeling seems to be, particularly in the private hire trade, that the consultation which has been talked about and discussed hasn't been, in their view, as extensive as they would have wished. And even if, as Andrew will obviously say, the consultation process has been fair and correct, there seems to be a perception out there that it hasn't been, and it hasn't come to a full discussion. Just talking about the, and I'm jumping around a little bit here, but this is the nature of the discussion. Just jumping around onto this consultation with the public of 800 people. Yeah, these 800 people, some of whom are specifically referred to in the survey as being at various ages, public will tend automatically in these situations to say, oh yes, we should go for the highest penalty, because they don't know the background to it. We're trying to understand all these strands of the background, but they simply don't. So they'll automatically say they want more safety. Even when that's not necessarily the outcome that they'd actually have. In terms of councillor involvement, I think we need to be very careful here, very careful indeed. This needs to be given more thought, in my view, because there would be surely an opportunity for pressure to be applied to councillors, or for councillors to feel under pressure to consider certain things. And also, wouldn't a subcommittee type system be even more subjective than simply the status quo? A huge majority of the private hire drivers are against these proposals. There are other things I want to say, Chair, but I'll leave that there for the moment. But I think the overwhelming thought in my head as things stand is that the consultation that we say has been concluded hasn't satisfied the trade.
Councillor Buckley, can I ask officers to reply?
Okay, I'll reply. There is no doubt that the perception of our consultation has been that we did not consult widely enough, and I think it's no consolation to us that we consulted more effectively than our neighbouring authorities. I don't think the perception that authorities are seeking to implement the toughest criteria without really going through the consultation. I'm not sure that can be upheld in Leeds. So after the consultation, we extended the consultation in Leeds, the request of several licence holders when we did the original consultation. We then held a working group and involved members of the trade, councillors, officers, passenger groups, stakeholder groups who had their say, and it was those working groups that came up with the recommendation. It wasn't officers; it was the working group themselves. It's hard for me because when I say that, people I think sometimes feel that they don't believe that we've done that we had the option in our back pocket, but genuinely came from the working group. I do think that this has exposed a real difference of opinion from members from the trade licence holders and members of the public. And I absolutely agree with you, Councillor Buckley, that if you put a survey in front of people, some people will say more regulation, no way, tougher standards, I don't want it. Even though the specific provision we're talking about here is very, very likely not to affect the majority of licence holders, and is very likely to reassure the public. And on the other side, people looking at this from a public safety point of view would say, well, I would demand even tougher. Why not? Why stop at 7, or why stop at 9? Why not have tougher conditions? And I think that's a feature of consultation on matters such as this. And I think it just reveals that when we do large scale consultations, it reveals the opinions of people with that come from very different standpoints in terms of that. I do think in terms of the first point, going back, and this is before my time in taxi licensing, the earlier convictions policy was certainly implemented in 2014. There may have been something before 2014 on driving points. When we did the report for comparisons on the implementation on suitability, I think I looked at the annual licensing reports and revealed that we had probably revoked one license every 2 or 3 years for people exceeding the 12 points and reaching disqualification. You actually see from the table in section 12 on page 25, we actually have now 6 people who are not revoked. In some cases, they've reached 12 or more points. They are appealing their conviction or endorsement. We have not revoked their license because we want to let the courts go through that due process there, which I think gives, again, Councillor Martin some confidence that we aren't quick to jump in and revoke where we can, but to see the policy through. I think in terms of the direction of travel nationally, there has very definitely been a focus on driving standard over the last several years, not just in West Yorkshire, but with the Institute of Licensing, Lawyers for Government, Local Government Association, and the Department of Transport. The Department of Transport has fully endorsed the point that licensing authorities should be able to impose a policy that sets a lower points threshold other than avoiding disqualification for someone to carry on holding taxi and private hire license. I think in terms of the licensing subcommittee, I think we would very definitely need to establish the terms of reference for a licensing subcommittee to make sure that we're absolutely clear exactly what the terms of reference are for how that would take place. In my 5 years in this role, I've never actually contributed to a licensing subcommittee. We're very keen to follow exactly the guidance that we would take in terms of how we would present the information to the members of a subcommittee, so that it would be very clear exactly how then that discussion could take place on whether that case could be, that case could be treated on its own merits.
Thank you, Andrew, for that. Do you want to come back with some more? Yeah.
Yeah, just briefly, Chair. Is it the case that, for instance, children driven to various things which children go to by drivers employed in one way or another by the City Council, these drivers are not subject or not potentially subject to these points, are they? Am I right in thinking that? And secondly, just a comment on the proposed training option. Various of us around this table have probably been to speed awareness courses. I think I've been to 2 over the years, and typically retired police officers go through the motions of telling you what you already know and what they already know. They know the highway code and regulations, and it's everyone pretends that the training courses do good, and in fact my view would be that it's 2 hours of your life you'll never get back, and they already know the law and they know when they've broken it. I'm not sure I'm a great fan of training. I just think this whole thing just needs to be, I think the whole point of the consultation just needs to be thought very carefully about further.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Officers, would you like to indicate who would like to respond, please?
Oh, sorry. Shall I do the training part of it? I've seen the training presentation. It very definitely isn't going through the motions. It's at 9 o'clock to a 3 o'clock, but it is not just going on the highway code. It actually is it's probably a very good template for what we would do by way of refresher training in terms of taxi and private hire. And particularly, it's the sort of thing that we feed back to the trade through our bulletins, license holders, about the things that we think sometimes people lose sight of. bearing in mind the changes. That's not just to do with the highway code, which has changed significantly this year, but also the legislation and other guidance that relates specifically to taxi and private hire. So I very much think it isn't going through the motions, and therefore it is worthwhile. I will get myself to attend one of those, so I can actually see for myself as well. In terms of what we do, it's definitely an enhancement on what we have previously done. I couldn't say if it's a much longer process, but for me, if the fact that it's sort of 2/3 of a day suggests that it isn't some sort of lip service and just a rubber stamp, just to say we've provided warm words and then on your way. I think it's something I was actually very impressed with the depth and the content and the thought that had been given to that.
Thank you, Andrew. John, would you like to comment?
Yeah, just to help answer the question about passenger transport, the council's passenger transport standards. You're correct, councillor. These standards don't apply to council passenger transport drivers. I've spoken to the chief officer responsible for passenger transport to find out what criteria is considered there. They've confirmed for me that there's no intervention until a driving licence is stopped for any reason. This could be from topping up of points to 12 or more before the driver is banned, disqualified for other reasons due to drink driving, etc., or revoked for not sending the licence to DVSA after an incident, or if the licence has chosen to be not renewed when it expires. So it's very similar to, well, it's exactly the same as a member of the public, is how the standards are applied to the council's passenger transport section.
It isn't licensable though, is it? It doesn't come fall under the licensing committee, for clarity.
No, Chair, that's correct. It's not a function that falls under the licensing committee.
Okay, Councillor Wilson, please.
Thanks, Chair. And just to start, I just wanted to lend support to Councillor Martin's proposal on the subcommittee. That sounds like it could be a very reasonable thing to do to address drivers' concerns, and I'd like to see more thought put into how that would work in the terms of reference and so on. Just want to get a bit of clarity for the committee on kind of the regulations affecting this. So in the papers for the meeting, it talks about must have regard to statutory and other guidance from the Department of Transport. We have a legal obligation to regard this guidance unless there's a compelling local reason, as you said, and that the Institute of Licensing Framework now forms part of the statutory guidance to licensing authorities. But we did receive an email which I think went to all councillors, which I now don't have in front of me, which talks about the Regulators Code from 2014, and saying that this supersedes statutory guidance. So just want a bit of clarity about whether that's the case. And following that, could you just let us know what would happen if the council doesn't follow DFT or Institute for Licensing statutory guidance? What are the consequences of that?
I'm going to bring in Nicole to answer that one. This is a legal question, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just in relation to the Regulators Code, that is a code that applies to public bodies that are regulating third parties. So it's not, first of all, it's not just in relation to licensing matters. And really that goes through 10 points about what should happen when you are bringing in a new policy or procedure or practice. Now, I've considered those 10 points and I have provided legal advice that we are very much fall wholly within all of the matters that they have to do. It's about making sure people are clear about what compliance involves. It's about making sure that everything is really clearly set out so someone knows what would happen if they didn't comply and what they would need to do to come back into compliance. And it's also very much about the extent of consultation and how that's carried out. So there's nothing in the Regulators Code that the council hasn't had regard to. And that code sits below a piece of legislation. It certainly it sits alongside those other codes. It doesn't trump. It's something else in addition to these other matters that the council has to consider. Just moving on to the other DFT guidance. So that is statutory guidance. It was brought in as a result of an act that required the Department of Transport to bring in guidance to deal with minimum standards for taxi drivers and vehicles and operators. And it's very clear that the department expects that the recommendations within the guidance to be implemented unless there's a compelling reason not to do so. And also sits beside that, but below, if you like, is the Institute of Licence and Guidance. So that's guidance brought together by all stakeholders, including members of the trade, to and it doesn't just deal with those standards, but in relation to standards, it's the Institute of Licence and Guidance that sets the interpretation that 7 points is evidence that there's been multiple non-compliances with minor motoring offences. So the DFT guidance says that a licence should not be revoked or refused if someone only has one minor motoring offence. So you would think that was about 3 points or a driving awareness course. What it does say is, however, multiple minor motoring convictions are clear evidence that a professional driver's standard is not to the standard that it should be, especially when the safety of the public is paramount. And so if you think about like what Andrew explained earlier, is that by the time you get to 9 points, you may well be on to your fourth minor motoring offence, because you may well have been offered a course first. And so that is why the interpretation around the 7 and 9 points has come into being through the Institute of Licence and Guidance. So I don't know if that's any help to members. It's not just an arbitrary 7 points, it's a reason, because the evidence shows that multiple non-compliance with minor motoring convictions shows that the standard of a driver, for a professional driver, which the department and the government have decided should be higher than people who don't drive for a profession. And that's how the points triggers have come into being, and that's the context behind how we got to or presumably how the working group got to the trigger points that they had. Obviously, we do have to have regard to that. If there's a compelling reason not to do so, we need to be very clear about what those reasons are. But I think, as officers have explained, and as the report fully explains, that we do also have to have regard to the representations received. And that is why the additional proposed amendments with regard to putting in that additional training between points 7 and 9 and not an automatic revocation option is being suggested, because then that shows that as a committee you have considered the representations made by the public, because they want the safety, other stakeholders, but also very importantly the trade, and that shows that you would be having regard, because if you were to go with that, I'll call it the tweaked option B, that shows that we've looked at the proposals that were consulted on, but actually you just want to change them slightly because you want to have more regard to the specific comments of the people who responded to the consultation.
I think the point for me that wasn't answered, Nicole, I don't know if you are able to answer it, was about what happens if the council doesn't follow it, if it doesn't follow statutory guidance.
Yes, Chair, just like I explained, you really need a real compelling reason not to do so. So you would need to decide, you would need to be of the view as to why that 7 to 9 points proposals that you're putting forward, you don't believe that that is necessary, and you would need objective evidence for that. So we would need to think very carefully if you were going to go against that guidance. But the DFT guidance is you should, say, for example, we had an authority wanted to not apply, not allow a license or not grant a license if someone had 3 points. Well, that would be going against the DFT guidance, because it very clearly says one infringement should not be sufficient to not grant a license. So that would be an example. Now, the proposals are not saying that. The proposals are much higher than that 3-point threshold.
You okay with that?
Yeah, I assume then essentially the consequences is that our decision could be revoked in court or by the Department of Transport, or?
Well, if good reasons aren't given for coming away from that guidance, then yes, any decision could be subject to challenge in the High Court.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Downs, please.
Thanks, Chair. One thing I find difficult about this is that we've been given national guidance for us to have a decision at a local level. I would have thought something like this should be decided on by the government, and then we all know where we are, and there's a consistent approach across the whole country. And I think it's regrettable that for something as important as this, the government haven't made it mandatory. However, we have options. I think one of the concerns that I've got is that when you look through the report, you see that there are reducing driver numbers within the authority. And one of the concerns is that we have sufficient drivers to fulfill residents' requirements. Now, that's not to say that we accept anybody as a driver. And the questions that Councillor Martin answered at the start were questions that I was going to ask anyway, so I thank her for those. Go back a year or so to a previous committee meeting, and I did ask officers at the time and about the possibility of a subcommittee. Personally, I favour that because I think that it means that there isn't a decision made by officers, which might be difficult for them, but it would be something that as councillors we would have that opportunity to make that decision. And there has been a precedence in the past. I used to sit on, I forget the exact name of it, but it was an employment tribunal. And I have had members of staff of council staff that have been dismissed. And I have had to listen to that case. And that is very difficult because you are deciding somebody's livelihood there. So I have done this before. And yes, there are pressures involved, but I think as elected members, they're pressures that we should be taking, and it perhaps shouldn't be down to officers to take those. So I would certainly do that. A couple of other things I'd just like to point. This is more of a comment, but there are some things that perhaps officers can pick up from. One is that on the option B in particular, it doesn't have any timescales for things. So it says that it says existing licence holders reaching 7 points or more for minor motoring convictions will receive a warning and will only be required to attend appropriate training. It doesn't say what timescale that training has to be done within. And I think there should be a time frame. The interesting thing is what happens if somebody gets to a certain level and then before the training comes on, their points drop below that level so that technically the training is no longer relevant. And is there something within? I don't think this is quite clear enough on points like that. And then the other thing is that existing licence holders reaching 9 points, again, how quickly would a subcommittee have to meet? Bearing in mind that there might be issues for public safety, would that driver then be permitted to carry on until the hearing? And what happens if points are dropped off the licence before that hearing comes? So there's one or two issues around that. You mentioned that the training looked very good and it wasn't just lip service to let's turn up and tell people what they already know. And I think it might be useful, my colleagues might not agree, but I would be very interested to attend one of those courses so that we understand what the trade would be going through, so that we actually fully understand the importance and the value of that training. I think that would be something useful for councillors. I'll just have a quick look, see if I made any other notes. Oh, and the other thing which I find disappointing is that, and I don't know if this can be addressed or be as a recommendation outside of our remit, but to the fact that there are young people being transported around by this council, potentially by drivers that have perhaps 9 points on their licence. If we're insisting that taxi and private hire drivers are reviewed after 9 points, we should be insisting that our own drivers are reviewed. There is a clear inconsistency there to me. Now, they may not be classed as professional drivers that are driving all day, but they are transporting around some potentially vulnerable people. So I just wonder if that can be fed back to whoever is responsible for issuing the, telling people to do that we have appropriate drivers within the council for consistency. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions, which are very pertinent. Just to say that with regards to drivers and the rest of the council, obviously it's not a license, it doesn't fall within the licensing committee, but I'm happy to pass it on to the relevant executive member for you, those comments. Okay. John, Andrew.
Thank you, Councillor. I think in terms of why we didn't put a timescale in a policy, but we might put it in a implementation note or something, might be that if we said we would do the training within 28 days and we did it on day 29, would that somehow mean we'd failed to apply the policy? In terms of the capacity for driver training or remedial training and so on, we are allocating 2 half days per month. At the moment, we're doing them in the last week of each month, and we try and do 11 or 12 drivers each time. So we've got the capacity to do something like 120, 130 sessions a year. I would very much hope our implementation, and again, this might depend on how we do the options. And again, there'd always be a provision for remedial training, irrespective of which option we provide anyway. All we've done is to enhance the training materials really in preparation. So I think that's the reason why we don't have the timescale specifically in the policy, but they might be in the implementation. Our aim would be, as soon as we are notified that someone lets us know rather than we find out. If we find out and they haven't let us know, that's a separate issue around not disclosing something. As John has mentioned, as soon as we find out that someone has disclosed, my aim would be to try and get that person on the next available driver training session. But that might not be possible depending on the numbers. You might find the next session's full, so it might be maybe 8 weeks rather than 4 weeks in terms of that. But that would be something that I think we could clarify in an implementation note or a written response following today. And I think particularly in terms of that, it's the same, I think, and that's where, and I don't think it's subjective, but I think there's very definitely a point here that we are not trying to punish somebody for exceeding the point. We are trying to make sure that the public feel safe. And I don't think the public would feel necessarily safe if we said that person's got 9 points on their license this week and it's going to drop to 6 points next week and we're going to take their license away for this. I don't think the public would feel any safer around that. I think if we've got that sort of thought.
Can you just clarify for Councillor Downs around, I think one of the important points he was making was around whether a license would be revoked while they're waiting for training, whilst the driver was waiting for training.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so just to come on to that. I mean, I think currently we would probably only suspend a driver while they're waiting for training if the training is linked to a more serious motoring offence than minor motoring convictions. I'm trying to think. I don't think we would suspend a driver's license to do that. We certainly wouldn't revoke somebody while they're waiting for training. If we've offered the training on the last Thursday of the month 6 months in a row and the individual hasn't turned up and hasn't attended the training, I think we would have another issue. And I think that's where the policy wouldn't mention, wouldn't go into the detail there about sort of failing to follow the process. But we would give someone a reasonable number of goes to attend the training. We'd also want to make sure that they were aware of the benefits to them of attending the training compared to the alternative. So for us, but I think particularly there, that sort of practical implementation would follow then from whatever policy criterion we adopt from today. And probably wouldn't. I mean, again, it's not in the other areas of the suitability policy about exactly how often we would review it or how often we would look at the other provision, but it'd be more to do with that sort of implementation side of things. But we've got a commitment to offer at least one training session every month, and if the numbers go up, we will offer more of those sessions every month. At the moment, we've got the provision to train 12 people every month, but we can increase that very, very quickly. Probably best for me not to try and answer the passenger transport question. Passenger transport is not covered by the Policing and Crime Act, not covered by the powers that the Secretary of State for Transport has got there. I don't know, Nicole, if there's any provision there for the Traffic Commissioner. I would imagine some of the vehicles that are in some of the drivers are subject to the powers of the Traffic Commissioner. I just wouldn't know in terms of the detail. That might be something that we follow up with the exec member for that area of the council. John.
I'm happy to do that. John.
Yeah, just to help clarify as well and reassure members, if there was a delay to delivering the training for a particular driver who had been asked to attend training through no fault of their own, they were unable to attend because the capacity was full, etc., then there'd be no action taken against the driver in those circumstances. Clearly, that's beyond the driver's control. I think the example that Andrew was given was somebody that didn't attend and didn't have good reason why they hadn't attended sessions. But if for any reason, I think Andrew's explained that the capacity is there and it appears to be sufficient capacity. But if there was a capacity issue and that led to an undue delay that was not the fault of the driver, then no action would be taken against the driver in those circumstances.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Hutchinson next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Started off with one question, but I've got quite a few now as the conversation's sort of gone along. First, I guess comments with regards to Councillor Martin and the subcommittee. I think that's a good idea should the proposal go forward. I like the idea of the subcommittee idea. And also, I think the council vehicles that Councillor Buckley and Councillor Downs has suggested does sound a bit like the council is saying, do as I say, not as I do. And I think certainly that needs to be passed on to the exec board member. With regards to the questions, so I'm correct in assuming that the other West Yorkshire authorities and York have adopted the criterion. They've adopted this policy already. Yes.
Can you answer on the microphone?
Yeah, to be clear, they've adopted something very, very close. I think Bradford has put another line into their policy. They've adopted something very, very close to what we all consulted on in 2018-19. They haven't, when we say this policy, we've got to be careful because the current policy is 12 points. What we consulted on was 7 points. And now we're looking at options that are somewhere 7 points, 9 points. So all of the authorities in West Yorkshire and in the City of York have got a policy that they would refuse at 7 points, and they are prepared to revoke from 7 points as well. Now, whether in practice then they do something more nuanced, but that's what their policies say.
Okay. Do we have any feedback or results from those authorities that has impacted on either lowering the complaints or increasing driver safety? And also, has there been an increase in logistics and resource from those authorities to be able to manage the new implementation? And should it be implemented within Leeds, do we have the capacity to be able to manage it?
Okay, I am aware that some of the neighbouring authorities have revoked people for achieving more than 7 points. I'm not aware that they've revoked someone for 7 points. I'm aware that they've revoked people for multiple minor motoring convictions at a higher points threshold, but not disqualification. The numbers, I think, are more complicated because it's compounded by people not reporting the points, which is a breach of the licensing conditions. So they might give that additional treatment and not see that as a single issue. They might see that as a dishonesty issue. I'm not aware that any of those decisions have then been appealed and overturned in Magistrates Court. In terms of the implementation of that, I haven't heard from the other authorities, but both Wakefield and Kirklees are about to start reviewing their whole driver suitability policy, which then includes the minor motoring convictions in the table A. So they will start in either their September or October licensing regulatory committee to set out the impact of those policies. Unlike Leeds, those authorities don't provide an annual licensing report, so it's something where we might see for the first time the detailed breakdown of the impact of the suitability policy on their casework. But I've not heard, I mean, this is anecdotal. I've not heard from those authorities that they're having trouble reaching licensing decisions on minor motoring convictions below a disqualification level. But they were starting from a different threshold. So Leeds already had a convictions policy and some of the other authorities didn't. So they were dealing with every case on its own merits. So to some degree, that rigor may well have helped them to define a process. In terms of whether Leeds has got the capacity, I think that it's a small number of cases that we see in terms of driving standard where people are committing minor motoring offences. I'm aware of fewer than half a dozen at the moment in terms of drivers who've reported to us 2 or 3 motoring offences in the last 12 months in terms of that. So at the moment, I don't think that that is a large number, councillor. But in terms of the capacity to provide the training, we will specifically earmark at least one training session every month. We don't want to be any excuse for us not training promptly. But in terms of the drop in driver numbers following COVID or the loss of earnings and so on, we are very aware that we need to enhance our driving training provision. That enhanced provision will not affect this. We will make sure that we can provide both.
Yeah, a few more if I may. Because you touched on the training. The training provider, are they an accredited training provider for this? And is there a cost associated to either council or the driver?
Yeah, the training currently is in-house if it's an issue that requires not something like an advanced motoring test. And again, we have the option of requiring people to do an advanced driving test. That's external. The classroom training is internal, and at the moment we've got one officer that provides that, but we've got a pool of other officers. It may well be enforcement officers, particularly, who would provide that additional driving training. They're appropriately certified, qualified. They'd have at least licensing certification from the Institute of Licensing or the National Association of Licensing Enforcement Officers, and we would meet those standards, and it fits with the driving standards element of NVQ or City and Guilds in terms of some of the other provision as well. So I'm confident that our provision meets recognisable standards. Oh, costs. At the moment, the cost is £60 per session.
That's cost to the driver?
Yeah.
I just have 2 more, if that's okay. Which is regarding page 43, which I think are the results for the of the people who support the change. And I'm correct that there's 34 people who support the change, 66% did not. Is that so? 34% of people just want, well, 66 want it to remain how it is. Is that how that interprets? Just a yes or no? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So based on the results and the demographic that you look into with regards to the results of the consultation, is it a reasonable deduction that probably most part of the people who answered the consultation are people who were very much new about the consultation and are probably a large portion of the drivers themselves? Appreciate that we don't know exactly the answer to that, but could a deduction be made from that?
Yeah, it doesn't need to be a deduction. The deduction is on the previous page 42. So drivers and public, or drivers and proprietors and public. So 57% of responses were from licence holders and 43% were from the public, including councillors, including other stakeholders as well.
And I guess I was sort of referring more to that on the basis that Councillor Buckley mentioned earlier regarding the consultation and the worth around that, I guess. But no more of a point than just that. I guess that's all I have. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Is there anybody who wants to comment on the worth of the consultation, or do you think that's been covered throughout the meeting? Take it you think it's been covered. Okay, we shall move on to Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Chair. I was hoping you could give us some information about how reliable minor motoring convictions are as a predictor of risk. If somebody has a low stack of minor motoring convictions, are they likely to be involved in a serious accident, or are they less? Is there no correlation at all? Is there any work done on the reliability of these statistics as a guide to action?
We haven't undertaken any specific work around the correlation between driving behaviour level of points, accidents, and so on. I think we've relied on national evidence and the evidence from the Department of Transport and the evidence that goes to the Safer Roads group in Leeds that talks about moving towards a zero accident city, and the link between accruing points and speed, particularly around that. And again, the points that we've made before around that we want to see taxi and private hire drivers as professional drivers. They drive a disproportionate number of miles. They often drive 2, 3, 4 times as many miles as the general motorist does. Their passengers don't have that control over whether how the drivers drive, where they take them, to that level. So no, we haven't carried out in that way. I did think we had for each of the working group meetings a representative from the Safer Roads group, and I've certainly contributed towards the Safer Roads strategy that's just that's just been consulted upon this year. We do know that the nationally the view from the Department of Transport, the view from the Institute of Licensing and elsewhere is that repeated infractions, repeated endorsements do indicate that someone either cannot or will not adjust their behaviour in terms of how they drive. And if they drive more miles, then we need to beware, I think, in terms of their driving behaviour. But no, we haven't got detailed drill down information, for example, just on taxi and private hire drivers.
Yeah, fine, John.
Is that saying we got no information at all, or we only have national figures? And if they are just national figures, what do they say? I mean, I can repeat the same question. Is there evidence that this is making any difference?
I think the summary is that the Department of Transport has endorsed a threshold at 7 points, saying we should not issue, or we must have regard to the recommendation, we should not issue a license to someone who's got 7 or more points, and that we should review the license of someone who's got 7 points. What we've been discussing for the last 2 years or so is the specifics of that, but to some degree there we are recipients of that national research and regulation rather than conducting it ourselves.
So it is evidence.
Councillor Illingworth, just a second, it needs to be some clarity on that. Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Just to clarify, it's the Institute of Licence and Guidance that has determined that the 7 point trigger is the minor motoring offences, which are multiple, is a sign. The DFT has not mentioned 7 points as being a trigger, but obviously the two sit together. There's part of that IOL guidance that the DFT has brought into their statutory guidance, and in both cases, all of that guidance was drafted and agreed with all stakeholders involved in this profession.
I could repeat my question because I'm genuinely difficulty in following this. Is the recommendation evidence-based or not? Has there been a study which says this is a reliable means of measuring driving performance? It might all be just personal opinion and
Chair, I think we can be, or members of the committee can be assured that there must be evidence that has looked into this. Otherwise, the DFT would not have been able to include standards in relation to the number of minor motoring offences if there was not that correlation with risk. And it is the risk that the evidence and risks associated with that evidence that has led to the need for the guidance to come from the Department for Transport. So as Andrew said, the council hasn't done its own evidence-based project, but we don't need to, because clearly the Department for Transport has used all the evidence available.
More questions, Councillor Illingworth? No. Is that okay? Yeah, okay. Who have we got next? Councillor Farley, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just start by commending my fellow members of the committee just for the quality of the questions that have been asked. I think we've raised a number of really good points so far, and actually Councillor Illingworth has sort of taken my question away from me, probably reading my notes. Around the evidence for this. I know that Councillor Martin at the start of the meeting picked up around safety and what is the evidence for this. Now, the response came that the perception of the public around safety was the key issue here in the evidence base. I would say that I don't think there's anybody in this room who doesn't put the safety of the public as their top priority. Therefore, I'd probably repeat what Councillor Buckley said with regards to is it a solution seeking a problem? So I just think the evidence around kind of whether or not is this going to make our roads safer? Is this going to make the experience of the travelling public safer? Is it going to ensure that our drivers remain safe while they're doing a vital and important job? So yeah, my question, just circling back, my question is is there any evidence that this is a necessary change to licensing in the city?
There's two. I think we've got there's a quote from the DFT, and then I'll let Andrew go in. I think it's a pertinent question. It needs clarity before we move forward. So,
thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to help members of the committee, you've heard about the DFT guidance, and you've heard how it's brought standards in, not just for minor motoring convictions, but other issues in relation to drivers and vehicles. But just in relation to motoring convictions, it might be helpful if I just quote from that guidance so you can see exactly what they found. It says Hackney carriage and private hire drivers are professional drivers charged with the responsibility of carrying the public. It is accepted that offences can be committed unintentionally, and a single occurrence of a minor traffic offence would not prohibit the granting of a licence. However, applicants with multiple motoring convictions may indicate that an applicant does not exhibit the behaviours of a safe road driver and one that is suitable to drive professionally. Any motoring conviction, while a licensed driver demonstrates that the licensee may not take their professional responsibilities seriously, it is accepted that they can be committed unintentionally. And that is, but there's very clear reference in that quote that when they say it may indicate, that shows that there is evidence to indicate that if you continue to get points on your license, it's an indication and it's evidence which indicates that your driving standards are not to the standard that they should be. And so that's where the multiple convictions comes from.
So just to come back on that, when we were discussing earlier, around the why would a council not follow the guidance? It was the point was that there had to be objective evidence. Now, my question would be: is it not the case in the reverse? Do we not need objective evidence that this is causing, actual safety issues to the public?
If Nicole, if you want to come in, and then Andrew, you wanted to come in as well to further the explanation. Originally, you wanted to come in, so I'll allow you to at that time.
Chair, just on that latter point, the Department for Transport has got that evidence and they've used that to formulate their statutory guidance. So they've got the starting point, and the compelling reason not to go with that starting point and agree with their position is the objective evidence that we would need. They are the Department of Transport, so they will have a wealth of evidence that has led them to pass this statutory guidance. So it's the statutory guidance is the default position unless there's a reason to depart from that. It's not the other way around.
I think it's a fair point, though, isn't it? That, you know, the evidence should have been a part of the appendix to the guidance to prove it. Otherwise, we are sort of going in the dark. But I take the point from legal. Andrew, I'm going to allow you to come in first before I allow Councillor Farley.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to turn to an area in terms of answering your question. One of the areas that again, it may have the point may have slipped somewhere. At the moment, the council's policy at the moment is to accept an application from someone who, as long as they're not disqualified, they can have 11 points on their license. I would say, in terms of the 5 other West Yorkshire and York authorities, those authorities are refusing applications or refusing to grant those applications. At the moment, those drivers can apply to Leeds, and we can have the people who are not seen as being safe and suitable in those authorities applying to work in Leeds to look there. I think in terms of the other neighbouring authorities, they are very likely, based on the information that we've got from the 85 authorities that completed the consultation. So there is a practical day-to-day effect then of the people who are applying to work in Leeds. They are possibly applying to work in Leeds, be licensed in Leeds, because they have already been refused by neighbouring authorities. That goes very much against what we've been trying to do with the authorities that we border, to try and adopt where we can similar policies, starting with drivers, moving on to enforcement, but also touching on vehicles where we can as well, to deal with that. So there's a clear element now that someone with 11 points on their driving licence, we would accept that application today in Leeds. It would not be accepted in the neighbouring authorities unless a whole chunk of those points was going to come off their licence. So there's a very practical element there. I think in terms of the risk or the evidence side of that, there's 2 issues, isn't there? There's the probability, and we are talking about a very small number of drivers with a poor driving record as evidenced by the number of points. We do know in Leeds, we have headline news items when we have fatal accidents in terms of that, and then we have a higher number of severe and serious injury accidents. So we do know the impact there of looking at a small number of drivers with potentially a high accrual of offences. And again, I'd reiterate, speeding particularly, if you have an accident while you're speeding, you're more likely to have a more severe or fatal accident as well. So for us particularly, I think I just wanted to introduce there that element of we clearly have a difference in policy and implementation between Leeds and all of the other neighbouring authorities at the moment. So I don't agree it's a solution in search of a problem. At the moment, we've got a big difference between Leeds and the other authorities in terms of that. And at the moment, that's one of the areas that we want to address by looking at the options today.
Councillor Farley.
Yeah, I suppose I've got sort of 2 comments followed by 2 questions. I think just in terms of kind of the evidence base, I think it would be helpful if we could be provided with evidence for scenarios like this in the future. Yeah, I've got to agree with Councillor Downs when it comes to kind of, if the DFT is providing guidance, the DFT should be providing legislation. It should not fall down to licensing committees to basically come up with a patchwork of regulations. My 2 questions are around option B. Firstly, kind of what would constitute a clear concern for public safety, and secondly, just following on from Councillor Martin's suggestion around having a subcommittee as sort of the ultimate arbiter around decision making, which I think, I would hope that would add in an element of reassurance for the trade. So it's not just officers making a decision. Just for clarity on the legal background of that, it does that decision does sit with this committee to go ahead with that.
Yes.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the decision as to whether licensing committee want to be, say, for a pilot temporary period to have control over that decision making. Yes, that is a decision of this licensing committee. It's not something you need to recommend to executive board, because the delegation initially came from this licensing committee to officers.
There was further.
Yes, it was the what would constitute a clear concern to public safety.
Yeah, I guess the concerns around public safety might indicate a pattern of behaviour that suggests that someone has driving in a way that suggests that they've lost the ability to judge their speed, judge their behaviour. Whether there would be very strong confidence that if they were to carry on without training in the first incident, and then obviously subsequently for revocation, without that intervention, that they would be putting people at risk by driving, and that would be around the evidence of the specific cases, whether they committed a large number of offences in a very short time, suggesting that they might be going through some problem that's causing them to drive erratically or dangerously. I think the other areas that I would give thought to there, and bearing in mind these are minor motoring, we're not talking about accidents, we're not talking about injuries, we're talking about accruing points through repeated speeding or going through traffic lights. I think a further factor there will be around someone whose behaviour is dishonest in sort of covering up that behaviour as well. So if they fail to report the points, that's not the same as someone who discloses that they've been caught by a speed camera, but they've got some mitigation and they're appealing it, which I'm sure will be the case for the drivers that we've got on our table in section 12. So for me, it's around that pattern of behaviour that shows very clearly, because you were asking about the sort of evidence side. A rule of thumb there would be: have we got a concern about that person carrying on driving, or is that just something that we can actually bring them back into compliance in line with the regulators code through the additional training and the warning that we're aware that their driving's fallen below that level. So it's that concern for future behaviour. So that's the public safety aspect.
Okay, Councillor Buckley, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be fairly brief, actually. This business, just going back to the business of a compelling reason not to comply with the statutory guidance. I've been on this committee for 10 years now, and we've always been told, and I'm sure it's absolutely right, that Leeds is an exemplar when it comes to licensing, thought of as one of the flagship authorities to follow. Why don't we say that is our compelling reason? That is our compelling reason, because we are very, very good at this, and we have the confidence to say it. Comment number one, Chair, that is. The word guidance. We've had guidance given to us for the last 2 or 3 years now. Oh, it's guidance. You must do this because it's guidance. We need to be careful. And I think we do need evidence, as councillors opposite have said. Actual printed evidence, not just, oh, well, it must have been done, or we assume it has been done. It needs to be written down. And Andrew mentioned that the training takes 6 hours, and he didn't mean to say this, but he kind of suggested that therefore it's good because it takes 6 hours. And I would just say that not all things that take 6 hours are good, like full council meetings, for example. Final comment, Chair, a serious comment really, that Councillor Downs made in passing, that do we think these proposals will increase the number of drivers, or do we think it might have the opposite effect? I think we all know the answer to that. So I think we do, as I said before, need to consult even more widely than we have done.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. And I totally agree. The government should be producing evidence when they hand down statutory guidance to us. I'll hand over to Nicole. Did you want to clarify anything on this, on the guidance, or?
Just in relation to statutory guidance, that does have more of an obligation on the part of the committee than other guidance, which is good practice guidance. But when there's statutory guidance, that is, we do have an obligation to give that greater to give that greater weight.
Thank you, Nicole. Andrew, so there was four questions. I think we've covered guidance, but there was another 3 questions there. Councillor Buckley, I'm so sorry, I forgot your first question, but the third is about training and 4 is about numbers.
Yes, I didn't assume that 6 hours was necessarily 3 times better than, I think you said 2 hours wasted, which made me think about the length of time the training takes. I think what I meant to say is not lip service. It's something that we take very seriously. It's something we've already been providing to drivers who's about whom we get complaints, or they get other things that maybe aren't just the same as endorsements. So we do take it very seriously. I am very confident in the taxi and private hire licensing team's ability to provide a stronger licensing service as the council wants in terms of that. I'd work with the chair and work with other officers to make sure that we can provide clear and compelling reasons of justification for what we've done around that. I'd reiterate our point that Leeds at odds with the majority of other authorities on the drivers with minor motoring convictions, and it may be the council's view then that we want to discourage drivers who've got a very high number of driving points from working in taxi and private hire trade. I'm not sure what the other question was.
Numbers of drivers.
Yeah, I think the numbers of drivers have definitely fallen over the last 2 years. At the moment, we are training around 50 drivers per month. We think we will have caught up with the drivers who have left the trade by Christmas. At the same time, providing additional remedial training to drivers that we've had complaints about or fallen short. I guess the focus of taxi and private hire licensing is that we only license people who are fit and proper and safe and suitable, and that should be our primary focus. We've heard for several years that there are too many drivers in Leeds and they can't all earn. And now we've heard that there are too few. I think our focus specifically is we've got around 600 drivers who are currently licensed, but who at the moment are choosing to not work as taxi and private hire. And I do hope that those drivers either decide in terms of whether they are going to work as taxi and private hire, or they're going to combine it with other work. If those 600 who have not left the trade returned, I don't think we would have the problem with the driver shortage. But I hear from drivers groups, but also operators and associations. I know they're feeling the shortage of drivers.
Are there any more questions from members? No? Okay, so we shall turn to the recommendations then. And the committee is asked to note the outcome of the consultation, note the supporting information which provides broader context to the implementation of the criteria relating to minor motoring convictions, and consider the options set out in paragraph 38 of this report and make a recommendation to the executive board. Now, I've got a list of, I've been keeping track of what people have said and where people seem to be, and the licensing subcommittee seems to me to be, I think, Councillor Martin's proposal, although I must say, Councillor, we've been able to discuss it because Councillor Cooper has done some work on this over the past year or so. So thank you for doing that work. Councillor Wilson, Downs, Hutchinson, Farley have all commented on subcommittees. So that leads me to think, to consider, and it's for me to move a suggestion, which would then need to be seconded, and then we could vote on it. Following, if it was voted on, if it wasn't accepted by the committee, then of course it would need to have a different proposal, which we would vote on. So going from that, we've had so many councillors mention licensing subcommittees. To me, that would indicate option B with a licensing subcommittee. So having said that, the proposal that I will move, which I will need a seconder to, perhaps Councillor Martin, given that you were the one who first raised the idea of licensing subcommittees, would be to move the following: to recommend to exec board the following, which is B on the list. Where have we got this one. In relation to option B, well, should I just read B there, shouldn't I? The proposed criterion is amended having regard to the consultation responses, setting out what the amended criterion should be. See paragraph 39 below, which Andrew has got up onto options here. So the proposal is that, however, I will resolve that for a pilot period of 12 months, any licenses subject to potential revocation relating to minor motoring offences be referred to the licensing committee or one of its subcommittees for determination. Okay, so to sum up, that's option B and everything that's out there, but with the added option of licensing subcommittees. So I'm proposing that. I would need a seconder and then we can vote on it.
I'll second it.
Yes.
Sorry, I will second it subject to it's the decision of the licensing committee after the 12-month ends, whether we continue with that process. Yeah. Yeah, or make it permanent if there's the evidence.
Relating to minor motoring offences be referred to the licensing committee or one of its subcommittees for determination, and then add on to be reviewed by the licensing committee after 12 months. Have you got that?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to, for me to propose it, we've had a seconder, which is Councillor Martin, and now we'll vote on it, please. So yeah, well, I've had a recommendation from legal that we could actually vote on B first, and then vote on B with the caveat of the subcommittee second. But I would actually suggest that we vote on B with the subcommittee first, yeah, and then we can vote on B afterwards. No, okay. I think we'll vote on. I just think we'll vote on B. I'm sorry, we're doing it on the fly here, aren't we? With legal, and it can get a little bit sticky. I am going to suggest option B with the caveat that we've already proposed, as proposed by me and seconded by Councillor Martin. Okay. Is there anything you want to add, Councillor Wilson? That's what we're going to vote on now. I can read it all out for everybody if you want and bore you all to tears, or are we all happy with it? Yes. Councillor Hutchinson, are you happy with that? With what I've said?
Well, I guess if legal are happy with that way that it's done, then I guess it's whether or not that it can be sort of ratified as that, or whether there'll be any call upon it.
Yeah, there's no reason why that motion can't be done as one. The only reason we were suggesting separately is in case a member wanted to vote in favour of option B, but didn't want to vote for the subcommittee, depending on, but there's no problem. That's the motion that's been put. So you would be voting to approve both of those at the same time.
So I guess it would be voting an amendment and then voting the substantive. Because you're requesting an amendment to B.
You changed your motion.
Sorry?
You changed your main motion to.
Yeah, I've changed the motion and had it seconded. I'm getting guarantees that it's fine. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So those in favour, yes, Councillor Buckley.
Just to be clear, when it comes to the vote, we'd like it minuted that which way we vote, please.
Yes. Okay. So those in favour, please, can you now raise your hands? Okay. Against, please. Okay. And any abstentions? Okay, that's carried. Thank you. Okay, so we shall move on to agenda item number 9, date and time of the next committee meeting, which is Tuesday, the 6th of September 22 at 10 a.m. In the Civic Hall. And that does conclude our business for today. And thank you all for your attendance and I must say very thorough contributions from both members and officers as well. So thank you very much for that.